In the early 2000s, roller coaster manufacturers began to up their game. This was the start of the insane coaster wars, and I don't mean the hit show on the Travel Channel. I mean the real coaster wars, where amusement and theme parks alike were building the biggest and baddest roller coasters out there to see who could draw in more crowds. In 2000, Paramount's Great America would open the world's first flying coaster named Stealth. This model would be such a success that in 2001, Vekoma, a manufacturer that sold many different types of roller coasters throughout this time, would build 2 more flying coasters. One of these models would be relocated to Kings Island, where most people knew this ride as Firehawk. Firehawk would operate for a few more years before it would unfortunately see its demise, and would later be taken over by one of the tallest coasters in the world. So, why did it close? Well, let's dive right in and learn about the story behind Firehawk. In the late 90s and early 2000s, roller coaster manufacturers started to up their game due to the supply and demand for thrill rides. Roller coaster manufacturers like Intamin, Aerodynamics, and Balaguer & Mabillard began to create some of the most unique and most thrilling roller coasters out there. We would even see new manufacturers develop, with the likes of Great Coasters International and the Gravity Group appearing on the scene. Corporations like Six Flags would rule the coaster wars. In 1999, Six Flags bought and constructed 21 different roller coasters, with only 6 of them being family coasters. Some of these rides would be the likes of Joker's Jinx, Ride of Steel, Georgia Scorcher, and Raging Bull, all in 1 year. However, one manufacturer stood out from the rest, not because of its creativity, but because of its compact and cheaper design. This manufacturer would be Vekoma. When you think of Vekoma, you usually think of boomerangs and suspended looping coasters. And these 2 models really put Vekoma on the map. Six Flags would buy 5 different Vekoma roller coasters in 1999 and would continue to build more throughout the years. While the coaster wars pushed manufacturers to design the biggest and baddest roller coasters in the world, it also pushed some manufacturers into bankruptcy. One of these manufacturers would be Aerodynamics, when they constructed X, a world's first 4th dimensional coaster, in 2001. It would put Aero out of business. However, the coaster wars did allow some of our favorite roller coasters to take shape. Roller coasters like Millennium Force, The Incredible Hulk, Superman the Ride, Phantom's Revenge, and many others would be built throughout this time. Now, as I said earlier, Vekoma was on top of their game, building tons of roller coasters across the world. But the truth was, they couldn't build an SLC or a boomerang at every park in the world. So, it was time for them to go big and make a unique model that no manufacturer has developed. And man, was it unique. Vekoma is an amusement rides manufacturer from the Netherlands. Vekoma was established in the 1950s as they began by constructing farm equipment. Later, they would begin constructing steel equipment for coal miners. Vekoma would continue to build steel products for other resources that were needed throughout the time. It wouldn't be until the 1970s where Vekoma was contracted to work with US manufacturer Aerodynamics. Aero taught Vekoma how to build their tracks, so that way Aero would have easier access to building roller coasters in Europe. In 1979, Vekoma began to build their own roller coasters. They would use Aero track techniques but evolve it with its Vekoma flair. Vekoma would be known for its unique roller coasters that were easy to build and transport. The company sold 15 of their boomerang models and 23 of their suspended looping coaster models, all within a 7-year gap of 1997 and 2003. This allowed the Vekoma name to be spread across the world. Parks were going crazy, as Vekoma would also introduce their junior coaster model, which was being sold left and right to parks across the world. However, it was time to expand. Vekoma knew they couldn't sell boomerangs and SLCs to every park in the world. They needed different models to showcase what they were really capable of, similar to B&M and Intamin. At the time, a flying coaster was an unknown model. The thought of a flying coaster has been talked about, but how the ride would actually work was a question that couldn't be answered. Until Vekoma stepped in and introduced possibly the most unique and anticipated coaster model that year. The world's first flying coaster opened at Granada Studios in October 1997 by the manufacturer Skytrek. Riders would enter a single-person cage-like car where the rider would enter in a standing position and would be lowered to the point where you were lying on your stomach. However, due to it being a prototype and being made by a manufacturer that wasn't made for designing roller coasters, the ride would close 2 years after it opened, along with the park in 1999. However, just 1 year later in 2000, Vekoma would work with Paramount's Great America in Santa Clara, California to design the world's first true flying roller coaster.
But California is also home to an entirely new kind of flying machine. Stealth, the world's first flying roller coaster, blasting through the air at Paramount's Great America in Santa Clara, California, just 44 miles from San Francisco. On Stealth, passengers lie face down, flying through the air with arms extended, rocketing through a coaster lover's idea of heaven.
Stealth would open to the public on April 1st, 2000. The ride was a big success for the park. The $17 million roller coaster would give riders a sensation as if they were flying around California. Vekoma would call this model the Flying Dutchman. Guests would load onto the ride, sit down, and strap in with an over-the-shoulder vest and a lap bar mix. Guests would sit down and adjust the vest to fit with their shoulders and snap it in like a seatbelt, and then a lap bar would come down as an extra safety precaution. The prototype would only last 3 years at the park, and it would close at the end of the 2003 season. However, it was relocated to Paramount's Carowinds in 2004. The ride would be repainted to green and black and have a Star Trek theme. The ride would even have some theming, as a crashed ship could be found in the middle of the ride. However, Cedar Fair purchased Paramount Parks in 2006. The ride would be painted to its iconic yellow and blue and would be renamed Nighthawk. Now, while Stealth was operating at Paramount's Great America, in 2001, 2 more Flying Dutchman roller coasters would open to the public. One would be Batwing at Six Flags America, and the other would be known as not only the best Flying Dutchman coaster, but the one with the most history.
Introducing the Midwest's first flying roller coaster, X-Flight. Get horizontal on X-Flight, the first coaster in the Midwest that actually lets you fly. Experience 8 loops, twists, spirals, and complete inversions. Fly 115 feet high directly into the sky. Riders rocket at speeds reaching 51 miles per hour. Smoothly soar over serpentine steel track. Total flight time, 1 minute and 50 breathtaking seconds of excitement. Are you ready for takeoff? Please fasten your seatbelt. You are about to depart from Six Flags, Ohio. Enjoy your flight.
On January 4th, 2001, Six Flags World of Adventure in Aurora, Ohio would announce their latest and greatest roller coaster, X-Flight. The ride would open to the public on May 26th, 2001, and similar to Stealth, it would be a major hit. Originally, the Flying Dutchman models were only allowed to be sold to Paramount Parks due to a deal between the two companies. However, after the mechanical problems of Stealth at Paramount's Great America, Paramount Parks pulled out of this deal. This allowed Six Flags to purchase the ride model. The ride would be similar to Stealth, as the trains would remain the same with only little changes taking place. The only major difference would be the ending of the ride. Stealth ended with the back-to-back corkscrew element and would turn into the brakes, whereas X-Flight would enter a double inline twist, and then enter a final helix and flip back into the brakes. X-Flight would also be an exact clone of Batwing. Six Flags World of Adventure was sold to Cedar Fair and renamed back to its original name, Geauga Lake, in 2004. The ride's theme and name would remain the same. However, in 2006, just 1 year before Geauga Lake closed for good, the ride would be relocated to Kings Island in Mason, Ohio.
The Firehawk roller coaster debuted at Kings Island this year. The new star ride actually came from the Geauga Lake Park in Aurora, Ohio, and was known as the X-Flight. But with new features and a new paint job, the coaster is better than before. Riding Firehawk makes you feel like you are flying like a superhero. Firehawk has 3,340 feet of track and hits speeds of over 50 miles per hour. The ride features 5 inversions, which sends riders upside down.
In 2007, Kings Island made the announcement that their next roller coaster would be Firehawk. The iconic green and black color scheme would be repainted to red and gray, and the ride would be located in the new X base of the park right next to Flight of Fear. The ride would officially open on May 26, 2007, exactly 6 years to the day after X-Flight opened at Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. Firehawk would be the last installation/relocation of any Flying Dutchman roller coaster. When the ride opened, it would be a huge hit at Kings Island, even though the ride would be relocated just 3.5 hours away. The layout went as follows. After you board the train, your vehicle will tilt back as if you were lying down flat on your back and dispatch out of the station. After taking a left-hand turn out of the station, the ride would ascend the 115-foot-tall lift hill. When it reached the top, it would descend down a small pre-drop and would then proceed to flip riders 180 degrees, as they are now lying on their stomachs facing the ground. After a small turnaround, the ride would go down its first drop and head up into a large but compact overbank turn. After this, the ride would go through another turnaround, but in the middle of this turnaround, the ride would flip riders back on their backside. They then would traverse through a 66-foot-tall vertical loop. After this, the ride would flip riders back on their stomachs as it would go through a small dip into a turnaround. After this, the ride would then flip riders through 2 back-to-back inline twists. Following this, the ride would go through a 450-degree helix and would flip riders back into the brake run. Firehawk, in my eyes, was one of the best roller coasters at Kings Island. When I visited the park for the first time in July of 2018, Firehawk was my favorite roller coaster in the park after my first visit. As an enthusiast from Florida who's ridden Manta countless times and is used to the B&M style of a flying coaster, Firehawk was a completely different experience. Some may say it isn't as good, but for me, Firehawk is still my all-time favorite flying coaster. I managed to get one ride in the back row, and it was intense. The overbank pushed you into the restraints. The sections where you were lying down on your back were really forceful, and the vertical loop was by far the best element on the ride. It still to this day is one of the weirdest elements I've experienced. Plus, the back-to-back inline twists were really fun as well. Overall, Firehawk was an incredible coaster that I still wish operated at Kings Island to this day. This was one of the only roller coasters in the park that you really couldn't find anywhere else, and it really added some charm to that section of the park. The ride would operate at Kings Island for 11 years. In September of 2018, Kings Island was teasing that one of their roller coasters would be closing for good at the end of the season. There was a debate whether this ride would be Firehawk, since Vekoma hasn't made a Vekoma Flying Dutchman coaster in years, or Vortex. Vortex made the most sense at the time since Arrow went out of business and the ride has been operating for 30 plus years. But unfortunately, on September 27, 2018, Kings Island announced that Firehawk would be closing for good at the end of the season.
Okay, so when you look at this, do you feel just a little nostalgic? You only have a few more weeks to ride the Firehawk at Kings Island. The park announced the coaster is coming down this fall. Consumer reporter John Matarese tells us what coaster fans think could come in its place.
Kings Island allowed guests to say their final goodbyes during their Halloween Haunt event in October, and then on October 28, 2018, Firehawk would close for good. The ride would later be demolished and sold for scrap during February 2019. Rumors on what would replace this unique flying coaster were taking place, and many speculated that it would be the highly anticipated KI Giga Coaster. Then, on August 15, 2019, Kings Island would announce their biggest roller coaster yet. On August 15, 2019, Kings Island announced Orion, a brand new B&M Giga Coaster that would be placed in Firehawk's old plot of land. The ride would be constructed and tested throughout late 2019 and early 2020, and the ride would then open to the public on July 2nd, 2020. What made Orion so special was one, it was one of the only roller coasters to open during the COVID-19 pandemic, and two, Cincinnati locals have been begging Kings Island to get a Giga Coaster for years. Orion opened as a smash hit as enthusiasts would flock to Kings Island to get a ride on their latest and greatest roller coaster. I myself can even say that Orion is one of the best rides in the world. In the queue line, you can find a tribute as you can see a poster of Firehawk. Vekoma discontinued their Flying Dutchman model in the early 2000s and hasn't built one since X-Flight. Vekoma has tried to build a model similar to the Flying Dutchman with Stingray at Giant Wheel Park in Suzhou, China. However, that model would also never catch on and would close in September of 2018. Vekoma still makes flying roller coasters, with their latest prototype being Fly, the world's first launched flying roller coaster, at Phantasialand in Brühl, Germany. Fly has been praised as the best flying coaster in the world, and we are all hoping to see more of these models across the world very soon. Luckily, Batwing and Nighthawk still operate to this day, so there is still a chance to ride one of the classic Vekoma Flying Dutchman roller coasters. However, rumors of their closure have been spreading at a rapid pace, so if I were you, I would get a ride on one of these models as quick as you can, because it won't be long. While Firehawk is still my personal favorite flying coaster, we can thank Vekoma for introducing this legendary model to the amusement industry and starting an uprise in the flying coaster industry, and Orion for being the best coaster in Kings Island history. Thank you all for watching my latest episode of The Story Behind. If you enjoyed this video, check out my playlist of all my episodes of The Story Behind and leave a comment on what defunct ride or attraction I should do next, and who knows, it might just be my next episode. If you haven't already yet, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to the channel. These videos are not easy to make, and this is the best way you guys can show your support. As always, this is Hunter from Theme Park Hunting. I'll see you guys later, and follow the thrill.